Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Hidden History of New England. I'm your host, Patrick, and today we're diving into a chapter of colonial New England that's often left out of the story, but it shouldn't be. We're talking about slavery here in New England, specifically in Connecticut, with what was known as the Malbone estate, located in what is now Brooklyn, Connecticut. We'll explore the history of Old Trinity Episcopal Church, one of the state's oldest surviving churches, and the stories of the 27 enslaved people whose lives became entwined with its past. It's also a reminder that the legacies of slavery and inequality aren't just Southern stories. They existed and in many ways still echo right here in New England. So, let's go back to the mid-1700s. Newport, Rhode Island is booming, a bustling coastal hub. Ships fill the harbor, offloading sugar, rum, and molasses, and taking on cargo bound for the West Indies. It's here that Godfrey Malbone Sr., also known as Godfrey the Elder, builds his fortune. Godfrey the Elder was a wealthy merchant, the son of Peter Malbone of Virginia, and he built his empire on shipping, privateering, in the transatlantic trade that connected New England to the Caribbean and ultimately to West Africa. First sanctioned as a privateer during Queen Anne's War, his ventures included a rum distillery and a wharf in Newport, Rhode Island, 840-acre farm on Prudence Island, and a 620-acre plantation in Middletown, Rhode Island. He even owned one of the grandest estates in Newport that would later burn down in 1766. And yes, much of his wealth was made possible by the trafficking of enslaved Africans in the industries that depended upon their labor. In 1740, flush with profits from privateering and the West Indian trade, Godfrey Malbone purchased over 3,000 acres of land in Pomfret, Connecticut, from then Massachusetts Governor Jonathan Belcher. A tract of land known as Kingswood. The land included meadows, woodlots, water rights, quarries, and several farmhouses, stretching north from what is now Day Street in Brooklyn to Pomfret Landing, westward to what is now Route 169, and south towards Brooklyn Center. Over time, Malbone expanded his property investments in Pomfret to over 5,000 acres, absorbing neighboring farms and creating a vast agricultural operation that produced the raw materials needed for the Caribbean sugar economy: oak staves for barrels, livestock, grain, and other provisions bound for Newport and the islands. It's here, in Pomfret, later Brooklyn, that slavery took root in ways most people never imagine when they think of Connecticut. By 1764, Malbone the Elder had deeded his Pomfret estate to his sons John and Godfrey Jr., along with everything on it. The list is staggering. It includes hundreds of livestock, 80 cows, 45 oxen, 600 sheep, and 27 enslaved individuals. That's an extraordinary number for New England. Most Connecticut households enslaved one or possibly two people, but 27. Those 27 names appear in the records like an echo through time. They include Prince, Harry, Pero, Dick, Tom, Adam, Christopher, Dina, Venus, Rose, Miriam, Jenny, and children named Primus, Christopher, Sias, Sharper, and Little Pero. Each name represents a person, a life, a story, and a presence erased from the typical colonial narrative. Among the names was Old Pero, who according to oral history had once been a prince in Africa. Family stories say he was taken captive, survived the Middle Passage, and was brought to the Americas aboard a Malbone ship. During that voyage, the enslaved people reportedly helped defend the ship from a pirate attack. Amid the chaos, the captain promised his captives that if they fought to protect the vessel, they would not be sent to the West Indies, a journey that would have almost certainly ended in an early death. They succeeded, and instead of being taken to the Caribbean, the ship landed in Newport, Rhode Island. From there, at least 27 of the captives were brought to the Malbone plantation in Pomfret. Life on the sugar plantations of the West Indies was brutally short. The average life expectancy after arrival was only about 5 years. In Pomfret, the enslaved people faced a different kind of bondage. It may not have been the same deadly labor of the Caribbean, but it was still a life defined by control, exploitation, and the constant denial of basic freedoms. Old Pero was baptized at Trinity Church and elected each year as what was known as king, essentially a spokesperson, a position that, in the culture of the enslaved, reflected leadership, dignity, and a way to negotiate for limited agency within the confines of servitude. He lived out his final years in Pomfret, baptized again in 1789 by Reverend Daniel Fogg, and when he died in 1791, he was buried in the Old Trinity Churchyard not far from his enslaver, Godfrey Malbone, Jr. Godfrey Malbone, Jr. wrote to his brother John about how relieved he was to escape the bustle and noise of Newport, only to find himself surrounded, as he put it, by heathens and savages, meaning his patriot-leaning neighbors like Israel Putnam. In the midst of the Revolution, Malbone remained a loyalist. He tried to make the estate in Pomfret profitable, but debts mounted. Godfrey the Elder's financial losses in the slave trade and shipping ventures had forced him to mortgage over 3,000 acres of land to William Paxton of Boston, a mortgage that Godfrey Jr. inherited. Paxton, a staunch loyalist, had his properties confiscated after the Revolution, including a portion of Malbone's land in Pomfret. Though Malbone was somewhat of a loyalist himself, his land was eventually reclaimed after petition. Still, he never recovered. In 1770, Malbone helped fund the construction of a new Anglican church in Pomfret, now Brooklyn, Old Trinity Church, as both an expression of his faith and a way to assert his social standing. At the time, he had been taxed for the construction of a new congregational meeting house on the Common, and as a devout Episcopalian, he refused to pay those taxes. Why should he pay for a church he wouldn't attend? He decided to build his own meeting house as a way to offset those obligations. Lacking the financial means to build the church on his own, Malbone secured support from local backers to bring the project to fruition. No payroll records survive, but oral tradition and contextual evidence suggest that Malbone's enslaved people hauled the timber, dug the foundation, and built the very walls of Old Trinity Church. The hands that built a house of worship were the same hands bound in servitude. Inside the church on the second-floor gallery, where slaves sat out of view of those in the lower pews, there are still faint carvings. One believed to depict a slave ship. It's subtle, easy to miss, but haunting. A literal trace left by someone who lived that experience. Someone who refused to be entirely erased. Outside in the quiet churchyard, the stones lean with age. Many are marked with names we recognize: Malbone, Payne, Parks. But beneath the soil and atop are unmarked graves. History suggests as many as 21 enslaved individuals are buried here, only a short distance from the Malbone family plot. Even in death, their lives remain physically close to the man who enslaved them, a stark reminder of how deeply intertwined bondage and privilege were on this landscape. The descendants of those enslaved families didn't vanish. Through painstaking research from local historians like Donna Dufresne, we can trace some of their lives and legacies. In New England, it was common practice for enslaved people, and later, those newly freed, to take the last name of the family who had enslaved them. That's why many of these names remain tied to local history today. Neptune Ingalls, born in Africa in 1790 and later enslaved in Pomfret, married Lucinda Malbone in 1816. Elisa Malbone lived in the household of Reverend Roswell Parks. Mary Malbone lived near Payne Road in 1870, And local legend Rufus Malbone, who lived near downtown Putnam, was buried with his horse along Route 44. They remained here, in Pomfret, in Brooklyn, in Connecticut, and in New England, long after the Malbone name itself faded from prominence. And while their stories were never written into the official town histories, their lives shaped the community in ways that can still be felt today. They lived here, worked here, worshipped here, and their legacy is woven into the very fabric of Connecticut and its communities. In 1784, Connecticut passed the Gradual Emancipation Act, a cautious, half-hearted step that declared children born to enslaved mothers after March 1st of that year would eventually be freed, but only after serving until the age of 25. Slavery lingered in Connecticut for decades after, and it wasn't fully abolished until 1848, less than 200 years ago. As for the Malbone estate, it crumbled. Godfrey Jr. died intestate, owing more than he owned. Towards the latter part of his life, he began emancipating a majority of his enslaved labor, perhaps more out of financial necessity than a good heart. His land was eventually divided and sold, and by the early 19th century, the once grand estate was but a memory. But the church remains. Today, Old Trinity Church still stands, quiet, white painted, and stately against the Connecticut hills. To most who pass by, it's a relic of colonial faith, architecture, and for some, infamous ghost stories. But for those who know its story, it's something more, a monument to both devotion and inequality, to both beauty and bondage. Thanks to local historians and projects like the Witness Stones Project, those hidden lives are being remembered. The Witness Stones Project partners with students and local researchers to recover the names and histories of enslaved individuals, placing small bronze plaques near the places where they lived, worked, and died. And in Brooklyn, in the churchyard of Old Trinity, those witness stones now stand as silent teachers, reminders that Connecticut's past is not as simple or as innocent as we were once taught. So maybe next time we walk past an old church or a quiet cemetery, we'll ask ourselves, who built this? Whose hand shaped it? Whose lives sustained it? And most importantly, whose stories are still missing? Because history is rarely simple. But when we look closely, when we follow the threads, and when we listen carefully, we begin to see the past and ourselves more clearly. I'm Patrick, and thank you for joining me on this episode of Hidden History of New England. Until next time, stay curious, keep asking questions, and never stop uncovering the stories that shape our world.